Welcome, everybody, to our pastor's Bible study this week. We are covering Ecclesiastes chapter 8 through 9, 10. This would be a great chance right at this moment if you wanted to grab your Bible and kind of follow along in the text as we talk. And this is also, even though it's a webinar, this is something we want to interact with. If you just have comments, you just like running commentary, you have chats that you can use. If you have questions specifically of us, Reverend Bill Curley or myself, you can drop in the Q&A, and our moderator, Reverend Kate, will be happy to get your questions fielded at the end. And otherwise, if you have other, technical questions, you can also ask those, I suppose. Bill, am I missing anything?
No, just that any question directed to us, I'm confident that Paul can answer.
Shall we begin with the word of prayer?
Let's do that.
Come, Holy Spirit, in our reading of Scripture, may our hearts be turned ever more closer to the desires that you have for us. May we be shaped to be your people, and in being shaped to be your people, may we love you more dearly as we learn more about you. And Lord, we pray that as your church, we would leave from learning more about you, loving you more dearly, to being transformed and continually turning to live in the world you created for us, live with the kind of love that you showed us. We pray all this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
So I want to begin by saying that this is the first time that Paul and I have done anything together in all the time that you've been here.
Anything?
Right? I don't think we've done anything quite like this together.
No, I suppose not. Not like a conversation or a public kind of thing.
Yeah.
Bill, can I let you in on a secret? This is an open secret now. I'm about to say it.
Sure.
Karen, who made these assignments, said she was scared. She didn't want to put the two of us together. She didn't know what would happen. It might take off too well. We would beat everybody else. Everyone would be blown away.
I think that's a foregone conclusion. I want to say that when we were having a planning meeting about this, the core faculty members of Kate, Karen, Paul, and I met, and all three of us, Karen, Kate, and I said, "Oh, the book of Ecclesiastes is the weirdest book in the Bible." And Paul said, "No, it's not. All the other books are the weirdest books in the Bible. The book of Ecclesiastes is the only normal book because it really calls it like it is. It puts your face right into the reality of powerlessness and the need for wisdom, and there's no way out of this. You're going to die no matter what."
And I was thinking about this, like in the preaching world, there has always been kind of a push by some that preachers need to talk about real things in the world, right? Like real issues that people deal with, and not talk about heady theological issues that, don't speak to anyone's real life. I think we're not talking about everything that people deal with in their life, but we're talking about the big stuff. So what, as a way to jump into the actual reading of the text, Bill, what were some of the big themes today that kind of point to the realities of life, and just generally, what are the themes that you're working off of?
Well, one of the things that I keep coming back to, and first of all, I thought again today how grateful I am to be doing this deep dig in Ecclesiastes, because otherwise I don't think I would have done it. I mean, there's no motivation for me to do this. But the other readings that I'm doing and other things that I'm teaching at St. Paul's right now really emphasize the importance of wisdom and understanding over knowledge and information. Knowledge and information are very important, and they really do establish a foundation for us to go forward. But here in the book of Ecclesiastes, you have an emphasis on wisdom and understanding. And I think one of the big takeaways for me is in this particular section that we're dealing with, Koheleth kind of encounters what I would call a kind of theological humility. He comes to understand that no matter what, no matter how smart he is, when he looks around at what's going on in the world, that doesn't keep him from um, his inability to figure things out. And so he's thrown back onto the what he calls the inscrutable nature of God, that even he cannot understand God. That here it is that powerful people flourish, the powerless do not, the wicked flourish, the righteous do not. He even in this particular passage laments that the powerful and the unrighteous are given great funerals and the ungodly are not. So that's one of the things that I took away from this whole big section is the importance of having what I call theological humility, of being able to say that we don't know.
And I think that kind of plays into also a general sense, especially in the beginning of this passage, about the way to interact with power, having kind of that not knowledge so much as that wisdom of when to push back against powerful people and when to let things go, when to just accept that you are a little powerless in the face of this situation. And I like, it's really easy to get worked up and mad and like ruin your day or your week because somebody in power did something that made you upset. I mean, everybody has had that. I feel like everybody I know has had a bad day in the last at least few years because they feel like one way or the other somebody with power over them has done something they don't agree with. And to a certain extent, like, the wisdom is figuring out like when to let it go, when to accept you don't have a power to move anything in this situation. Don't get yourself in trouble trying to fight something you can't handle. But when to fight, I think, is another kind of theme. We're going to talk also a little bit about theodicy, which is to say, like, it's also called the problem of evil, which is often formulated why bad things happen to good people, is at least one way to put it. But
So before we get there, the one other thing I want to say about these first 9 verses is I really look at this as what I would call a survivalist guide in the system. If you don't have power, you need to know how to play the game because the powerful will get you. And I think that's what Koheleth is saying. And Paul says a similar thing in the New Testament about giving in to legal authority because it's the smartest thing to do in order to survive in the system. Okay, so that I want to say that. When I read these verses, I also thought about how the church's role is to advocate for those who have no power. And so I got that out of that. I'm ready to talk about theodicy. I love that topic.
well, I mean, the last kind of theme that I had, we're gonna also talk about marriage. That this is one little comment. I think it plays into a larger way than which we might think about how one derives happiness. That there's a certain way in which being good to your body is something included. Like, we've heard the repeated refrain about eating and drinking and enjoying yourself, but he kind of goes a little deeper and talks about ways in which kind of taking care of your body, like your physical, not just your mental self, but like your physical self is important to your well-being. That's kind of a rare idea in the Bible, at least what's coming to mind. That's not a common refrain in the biblical text. I think it's interesting to point out. But I mean, we can get to theodicy You had more to say about the like survivalist ethic kind of at the beginning in chapter 8. Do you want to go to the Theodicy and go work our way back, be non-sequential, Bill?
Sure, I
Okay.
can do that.
Okay, so back to Theodicy, we talked about it as the problem of evil, and why do bad things happen to good people? Do you want to start by reading the verses, Bill, that from Eugene Peterson, from chapter
I can
9?
do that. I can do that. Um, and again, this is Peterson's translation. Well, I took all this in and thought it through inside and out. And here's what I understood: the good, the wise, and all that they do are in God's hands. But day by day, whether it's love or hate they're dealing with, they don't know. Anything's possible. It's one fate for everybody: righteous and wicked, good people, bad people, the nice and the nasty, worshipers and non-worshipers, committed and uncommitted. I found this outrageous. The worst thing about living on this planet, that everyone's lumped together in one fate. Is it any wonder that so many people are obsessed with evil? Is it any wonder that people go crazy right and left? Life leads to death. That's it.
So I think so. We're maybe a little weaseling in this theme of Theodicy, but I think that gets at it. I also want to just mention the way in which he talks about the wicked people get praised in their life, and they never kind of get their comeuppance in life. That's in chapter 8. 8:11, the condemnation of the wicked acts isn't carried out quickly. That's why people dare to do evil. So there's like a perpetuation of evil because they're not held accountable. But yeah, so the problem of evil, I'll start by just the classical. Does that work? The kind of the earliest kind of articulation of theodicy comes from Leibniz, which is what's his first name? Wilhelm Leibniz. Does that sound right? Someone can correct me.
Yeah.
Someone can Google Leibniz. But Leibniz was the first to articulate this idea. If there is an all-powerful God who is all good, why does evil exist? This seems to be a logical problem. He's writing in the beginning of the Enlightenment period, when people really believe that everything can be solved based on logic and reason, and very disinterested in kind of what you were talking about, Bill, theological humility. Like there
Right.
is nothing we can't figure out, was the attitude that they had at this time. And so he said, okay, this is a problem. Let's work on how do we fix this? And he starts out by saying, well, this is actually the best possible world. That nothing better could have been created. And that's partly because God could not have created us perfect, free from error, because the only thing that could be free from error and perfect is God. This kind of comes from a Greek way of thinking about theology. In Greek philosophy, if you're trying to imagine the best thing, it's kind of a unique thing that you imagine like God as the free from error. Like perfection means free from error, and that's what God is to be the most of a thing, that's divine. In the same way, like the most good would be like the highest level of good, that would be what God is. So he's kind of using that Greek formulation to reason through this idea that God is the most powerful thing and the most good thing. And we have to be below that necessarily, because to be anything more would make us divine. We're close. We're pretty good, actually. But we're not God, so we are necessarily not perfect. And those imperfections basically account for evil in the world. Kind of everything kind of stems from the fact that we're not perfect beings created by God. And he also separates natural disasters, anything that happens that's outside of human articulations that we might formulate as evil. He says, no, that's actually just random chance. God kind of made the world to include random chance. So that's not evil. That's just the way it is. I think that's an enticing, that kind of separation is enticing for me, especially since, you know, how many natural disasters are human made, whether it be drought, whether it be like just not preparing and you live in a flood zone, like building a bunch of houses in a flood zone maybe wasn't the best idea, and not building them high enough or something like that. There's so many ways in which natural disasters are big problems that humans have made. So I think, so this is kind of the beginning of the formula of the problem of evil for Leibniz. I'm going to pass it over to you, Bill, I promise, but I want to kind of like bring it back down to the human level before I do. So I had one of my advisor in undergrad just retired this past semester, and he, when he was before he got into academia, he just graduated college, and he started working, writing a newspaper in his hometown. And his there's a horrible multi-car pileup on the freeway outside of their town, and he went as a reporter to go see the accident, and he discovered that his own brother had died in the crash. And so this pushed him into a kind of lifelong question about why God would allow this horrible thing to happen, and to him, no us, right? Like this didn't just happen to someone else in another part of the world. Like this happened in his life. His brother died at a young age in his 20s. That's not what a righteous God would do. And his answer is a lot more complicated than I think we have time to go into. But in real quick summation, I mean, he basically begins to think through. He doesn't believe that God is free to act in any possible way. That there's, in some ways, there's ways in which God chooses to limit God's self. God doesn't act in any possible way that God could act. And there's many reasons for why God would do that, but in his way of understanding it, it's because he believes it's necessary to allow humans to live lives of any meaning or any purpose, of any free will or ability to act in any way. God needs to necessarily back away a little bit, at least, and not act in every single event in the world that might cause any mistake. So that is kind of one way, you know, this question is it's a real life issue. How do you understand?
I remember years ago when Rabbi Harold Kushner came out with his book titled "Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People?" The title just got all over me. I mean, who are we to say who's good and bad? Bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. Bad things happen. I mean, it gets in the whole area of judgment about that. And although there is without question tragedy that happens in human life. Very frequently, out of those tragedies, we learn our most important lessons. So I am with Barbara Brown Taylor about this. I don't believe that God is out there somewhere, and occasionally this God has a stick that reaches down and stirs things up on the earth and causes some hurricane to happen here and an earthquake to happen there and something. I think there are other ways to explain why these things that we call bad things or tragedies happen. When I was in the seminary, I was influenced by two books that an English cleric and theologian named Leslie Weatherhead wrote. He wrote a book called The Christian Agnostic, which is really helpful for me because it got me to thinking about this whole business of what I don't know. The whole area of mysticism in Christianity, Christian mysticism, the cloud of unknowing, what we don't know, and the wisdom it's involved in not knowing. But he also had a little book called The Will of God. And that book really helped me understand why what we call bad things happen. One is statistical probability. A certain number of car accidents happen on freeways every year. we may or may not be in one. A certain number of people die of heart attacks. That may or may not happen to one of us. Certain number of people get cancer. There is this statistical probability of certain storms happening in certain areas, and we have, depending on your view about climate change, little or no control over that. So statistical probability is one answer. Human limitation is an answer. I can remember a time when I was a child when the fear of every parent for their child was polio. And I can remember being kept in from going to the swimming pool and playing with my friends certain times of the year because my parents, particularly my mother, was afraid of getting polio. And certain of my classmates did get polio and died of polio. And I lucked out on that. I didn't get it. And then comes Jonas Salk, and he invents this vaccine that virtually ends up eradicating polio from the face of the earth. I would say that it's God's will that the invention of the polio vaccine took place, not that certain children died of polio, which was a virus that kids caught. A few years ago, about 11 or 12 years ago now, I was quite unexpectedly diagnosed with coronary artery disease. And within a matter of hours after the diagnosis, I underwent a quadruple bypass surgery. A few years before that, the surgical procedure didn't exist that could have saved my life. So human limitation, as humans have gained more and more ability to be able to do things in the field of science, then we have gained more expertise. And then there's the category, the third reason that Leslie Weatherhead said that so-called bad things happen is human evil. A person gets drunk in a bar, gets in his or her car, and drives head on into a family of 5. I mean, God didn't do that. Human error, lack of wisdom, lack of forethought did that. I think that Jesus was very clear about his understanding of God, who caused the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. There's no difference. Although I love to quote this passage when I was in seminary in Union, my professor of Old Testament said, God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, but the just get wetter because the unjust have stolen their umbrellas. But
That's pretty good.
I think those are the reasons. God's will is that we, given, and this is where I think I see a turn for Koheleth in this part of the book of Ecclesiastes, particularly as we get a little further on, is that even so, wisdom is better than ignorance, and living is better than death. Therefore, let us make the best of being wise and living to the fullest.
Well, and yeah, is this a good time to mention Dogs and Lions, Bill?
Sure.
This aphorism that is like, I mean, so many cultures have adopted this idea. It's better to be a living dog than a dead lion. This idea that dogs are despised and they're like kind of filthy street creatures in the ancient Near East, and I think
even today,
even in the modern,
even today,
huh?
Even today,
Even today,
yeah,
they're dirty. And I live in the East End. We have stray dogs that attack people. There was a famous incident where a kid was killed on my side of town a few years ago because of a dog. After school, was mauled by a dog. Like, dogs are not pets in this society that Kohelet has. And what is a lion? I mean, that's, even then, it's a regal creature, kingly type thing and powerful, who wouldn't want to be the lion. But What does power, what does wealth mean if you're just going to die like everyone else? Better to save your life of any kind, even if it is, um, even if you're a dog.
Mm.
But I want to, I know that we're kind of wrapping up Theodicy, but I want to wrap up by at least mentioning, just emphasizing how much it really seems like the problem of evil theodicy is really a Western question. It really comes from Western Enlightenment. And you're kind of hinting at this at the end there, Bill, that like there's a discomfort with not knowing why things happen that lead us to the problem of evil. Like it's only a problem insofar as we're unwilling to admit that there is so much we can't know in this world. And your points about your medical thing kind of reminded me of a story. I in seminary, one of the things I did is I spent a summer as like a little missionary intern in the Malawi annual conference, the United Methodist Church. And part of our responsibility was when all of these American churches would come on mission trips, we would be their like field guides. You know, we had a month more experience than they did in the country, so we could be their tour guides a little bit. But one of the medical mission teams, there was a physician there who went into a village, had a connection with this Methodist church, went into their village, just really remote. None of these people would have ever had a physician or any medical service available to them, probably their entire life. And an old person went to him and came to the, everybody in the village came to this, site where these this medical team was. And there's an old woman who had come up and came to the physician. And the physician, after doing some tests and stuff, some pretty rudimentary stuff that you can do, easily, he says, she has heart disease. She likely will not live much longer. This is, and he turns to his interpreter and says, what do I say to her? How do I describe that in a way that she understands? And he goes, oh, just tell her that she's old. She'll understand. Why are you feeling that way? This is what happens when you get old. It's normal. Things happen when you get old. You get sick and you die. So the interpreter told her that. He told her, you have problems of old age. This is what happens when you get old. And she accepted that. Because she had an understanding that she's not going to live forever. And that part of what it means to live is it means to your body to break down. And so she could accept that her diagnosis was not an exact clinical diagnosis. She wasn't told she had heart disease. She wasn't told the exact nature of her problem. She didn't need to. One, unfortunately, because she couldn't access any other medical care. There's no real way that she could have. But also,
my experience is in dealing with the dying is that most dying people know. Yeah. Most dying people know what their condition is. And of course, sometimes family members, there are all sorts of ways of approaching this in hospital setting. I came to Houston to enter clinical training in psychology in 1966. And the first book that we were assigned to read was the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. You got to forgive his sexist language. He didn't know any better at the time. That book remains on the list of the top. It's in the top 100 best books that people revere for its meaning for them, Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl wrote that book before his pregnant wife, mother, father, and brother were put into a concentration camp in Germany. The day that they entered the concentration camp, he begged the guards not to take the manuscript of that book, which his wife had sewn in the lining of his coat away, but they did and destroyed it. He had to rewrite it. That day, his pregnant wife, mother, father, and brother were executed, but he didn't know that until 3.5 years later, when he was liberated. They kept him alive because he was a doctor. In that situation, he saw all sorts of horrible things happen. and people die horrible deaths. But still, he came out of that with this conviction that no matter what, nobody could take from you the freedom to choose how you will assign meaning to any event in your life. He said, there's a quote in the book that says, even when the assassin's bullet is flying at your head, you still have that freedom. Nobody can take it from you. And that freedom is the freedom about, have I lived well? Have I lived worthily? Does my life have meaning? And he said that people who lived in that direction were those who stood a better chance, it was no guarantee, of being able to survive the horrors of the Holocaust. If you've not read that book, read it. Man's Search for Meaning. It will make a powerful impression on your life.
Okay, so where do we go from here, Bill? Do you want to go back and talk about the limits of power, or do you want to talk about this marriage discussion?
Well, I would say one other thing about this whole joyful business about dying.
Yeah,
A few years ago, I read in the Christian Century, I think it was in the Christian Century, a man had written an article. He read that the people in Bhutan were the happiest people on the planet, and that they also live in a culture where there's a bell that rings every day, 5 times a day, that reminds them that they're going to die. And so he came up with this app that you can get for your smartphone called We Croak, We Die. And 5 times a day, it randomly comes up and gives you a quote about the meaning of life and death. And it reminds you, it's a reminder. It comes up on your phone and says, reminder, you're going to die. And then there's a quote of some kind. And people who keep that awareness in front of them are happier people. That's what I think.
So what did you get today? Do you have an example?
I do. An example of We Croak today. I absolutely do. And here, oh, come on, come back. It's, here it is. Wherever you go becomes a part of you somehow. And then some of these, this by Anita Deisel. Some of these I save and put in my photo album so that I can go back and remind them and use them in my class, and people think I'm wise. And I really am just stealing the quotes from We Quote.
So you want to jump into the conversation about marriage? So chapter 9, verse 9, in the Common English Bible, it says, enjoy life with your dearly loved spouse all the days of your pointless life that God gives you under the sun. All the days of your pointless life, because that's your part to play in this life and in your hard work under the sun. Again, under the sun is like all those things that happen in the world. Under the sun is just a way of talking about earthly life, and this idea of your dearly loved spouse. I have been encouraged by friends, colleagues, family members to be more pro divorce in my life. I was raised in a pretty anti-divorce situation. Bill, you kind of mentioned to me that you were in a really anti-divorce kind of culture growing up. I definitely was not I was not in a divorce is the worst thing that you can possibly do camp, but it should be the last resort if, it is a matter of your safety kind of thing. So I think I always appreciated the need for divorce if there was a situation of intimate partner violence, of abuse of any kind, or infidelity or something like that. but I was not. I have been coming around the idea that there's a way in which, because I've seen, how people, and I'm sure many of you listening, know this kind of divorce personally, that there's a certain kind of marriage where it's clear that it is no longer producing thriving people. There is like a way in which the relationship cannot continue to produce fruit. It no longer can. Um, it no longer makes things better for the people in them. Like it no longer creates freedom and joy and all sorts of wonderful things. Not to say it's like it's not perfect anymore, but that it's like it has become like a massive drain on one or both parties. I think typically it's like both parties, both people in the relationship are really losing life is one way to put it. But I think partly what the part of divorce that I'm still very much against, and I had a family friend growing up where this happened, where one of the persons in the divorce said simply, "I am no longer happy." And that was the reason, at least given, for the divorce, which I took to mean they wanted to be with other people because they were bored. They no longer had the same kind of youthful enthusiasm and joy with their spouse that they had when they first got married. They didn't have the honeymoon period, and they wanted the honeymoon period back because they expected their spouse to produce all the happiness that they needed. They didn't think that there was anything that they could do for their own happiness, but it was purely something that they expected their spouse to fulfill for them. And there was a kind of it felt self-centered to think that everybody else should be responsible for your happiness, and there wasn't a sense that marriage should be about love flowing through and forth from that couple. They should together produce love that flows out of them to their community, to their church, and I think that this is a little bit like what Kohelet is talking about. There are so many ways in which we can get frustrated with our spouses, frustrated in whatever human relationships we are, whether they're romantic or not, and our close friends. We can get deeply frustrated and we can want to give up on our friends, our spouses. And I think Kohelet is kind of saying like, relationships are one of the greatest gifts we have, people. Like we should seek great joy and enthusiasm from those around us. I think he has also something to say about how else we show enthusiasm. But Bill, I know you also have opinions and thoughts about marriage. I've only been married. I've never been divorced. So I know that, I don't know what it's like to go through that situation. So I know I need to remain pretty humble about what I think about marriage, despite the fact that I marry people all the time and give them my advice on the matter.
Well, my external observation of you and Karen is that you're in a good marriage. You both are very thoughtful people, and that and a lot of people are not thoughtful. Over the long haul of history, particularly in Kohelet's time, I think marriage probably meant different things. People got married for different reasons, stayed married for different reasons. The role of men and women were certainly perceived dramatically differently than they are now. When my parents married, well, let's go back to my grandparents' generation when they married. Um, because of transportation and communication, the opportunity for picking marital partners was limited. People married and had big families to help do the farm work and survive on the farm. If your father was a butcher, you were likely going to be a butcher too. And now we live in a much different world. I think our society misleads a lot of people into into misunderstanding what marriage is all about. So one of the questions I ask couples before performing a marriage for them, although I got to say, I think premarital counseling is ineffective because people who have already decided to get married, they're going to get married, and I've seen very few situations where premarital counseling caused people to say, "Oh, I made a mistake here. I'm not doing this." As a matter of fact, I've heard even sadder things about people saying, when I asked them, "Why did you get married?" And they said, "Well, the invitations were already sent out, or we'd already paid the caterer, or, not good reasons for getting married." Our society convinces people that you get married in order to be loved. And actually, marriage is a gift to teach people how to love. And I've had people come in for counseling sessions to say, I love my spouse, but I'm not in love with my spouse. You know what I mean? And of course I know what they mean. That romantic love that got them through the first 3-5 years of marriage is gone. And so now they miss that and they want something else. Marriage is a skill set. And skill set, like learning how to talk, which this sounds really judgmental for me to say this, but most people do not know how to talk. So when a couple comes in for a counseling session and they would say, "We have trouble communicating," I want to say, "No, you don't. I don't do this because that would be too much of a smart aleck." But there's no behavior in the presence of another person that doesn't communicate something. So we communicate with our intimate partners all the time by looks and turning away, and whether we respond or don't respond to something. Talking is the skill. And the man who owns the market in marital satisfaction research in the United States, a man by the name of John Gottman, says that the key factor in a satisfactory relationship is the amount of time that people spend talking to one another. And he says there needs to be a ratio of 6-to-1 positive to negative exchanges in a good relationship. So Sherry and I attended a psychology conference in Atlanta, Georgia, where Gottman presented his research. This is years ago. And we both sat there and took notes and looked at him, impeccably dressed, bright guy. And then we went to lunch afterwards and talked about what we had heard. And I said, boy, Gottman's really got a point. Those 6 things, those 6 positive things that we say to each other every day are so important. Thank you for bringing in the paper. Thank you for making the coffee. You look good in that outfit. The perfume smells great, or whatever it is. And she said, I didn't hear that at all. What I heard was, how powerful is that one negative? It can wipe out so much. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So I think about people who, my parents, my parents are married 72 years. 72 years. I would tell people I'm going back to celebrate my parents' 70th anniversary, and some people would say, I love my spouse, but that's too long. But they were married 72 years. My father adored my mother to the very end. He was a real romantic at heart. And so I was privileged to grow up around that.
My paternal grandparents were absolutely that way, and my grandmother died in Holy Saturday 2013, and my grandfather died on Christmas Eve of last year. And those years that he spent without her were absolutely painful for him. So emotionally painful. Every day he wanted to know where she was. I mean, in his end, he was asking for her, because, of course, he started to his his body started to break down, and he had began to forget, but like he always was, just wanted to be with her after her, and it was an incredible way. It wasn't just because he was dependent on her to live life. It was because he, absolutely adored and cherished her and found so much joy
So,
in life with her.
I don't want to limit this just to people who are married, because I think a lot
Yeah.
of people that who are listening to us are no longer maybe in a marriage relationship, maybe have never been. Uh, I think what I gained from this is that the key. First of all, I want to say that I think that a value that we who seek to follow the teachings of Jesus and walk the way of Jesus, I think a value that we need to embrace is the one that you see embraced in the book of Ecclesiastes, a commitment to explore, to learn, and to grow spiritually, religiously, relationally, psychologically, in every way that we can. That's one of the takeaways that I have from doing this study, is that what you see here is somebody who has the courage to do this really in-depth look at life and living, and to face head on the unavoidable anguish that all of us deal with in thinking about not being here anymore, about dying. So that commitment to growth, I think, is really important. And what this passage says to me, apart from being in an intimate marital relationship, is the importance of love, and what it means to love, and how we can love, and how every time we encounter another human being, we have an opportunity to put into practice the values of peace, love, joy, patience, and humility in every interaction that we have.
Yeah. I love to, people will love to pick Ecclesiastes 3 for weddings. A stick of a 3-bound stick is not easily broken. 3 sticks, held together are not easily broken. Something like that. People always read it for their weddings, but I think, this is a lesson for community more than just marriage. This is about humans need one another, and I'm thankful for the monastics in the Roman Catholic Church for kind of witnessing to the ability to have deeply meaningful, loving, intimate relationships that are non-sexual. That like you can have deeply meaning the fact that they can have deeply meaning, non-sexual, loving relationships with those other members of their order, and with whom they live in community. And I think for Americans that are really in love with the idea of the nuclear family, a uniquely kind of American idea, and that we live in single family homes apart from one another, and we are all separated from our extended families, at least most of us. We don't live anymore in intergenerational homes. We don't live with a ton of other families like around us. We're pretty separated from one another. And I think this is kind of another, to your point, Bill, that like all relationships can be these like meaningful, powerful ones of love, if we pour into them, are willing to take them as seriously as we take maybe our marriage, I think is maybe one way to put it, for those of us who are married. Bill, we can wrap up with maybe the takeaways, but I also want to kind of point out right after this kind of business about this verse 9:9. I'm sorry, right before 9:8. Let your garments be white. Don't run short of oil for your head. So like this passage about marriage, it also kind of talks about like taking care of one's body. Let your garments be white, like wash your clothes, wash your head. I think that like later on, this idea, this Gnostic idea in Christianity that your body was evil and shouldn't be taken care of. I think this is like a great antidote to that. Like a big part of what it means to have a joyful and meaningful life is like love your body. And I think that's really important, like in a society that wants us to be kind of ashamed of our bodies, whether that's so that we'll buy a gym membership or makeup line or whatever it is. Like we're kind of thought that our bodies are not the like wonderfully created, masterpieces that God created. Like we're not willing to accept that like our bodies are beautiful because God made our bodies. And we may be frustrated with I don't know, the fat content or the shape of our body or how we feel or something like that. But like, do the regular things to take care of your body, but do it as an act of love for your body, of love for yourself, because that really does matter. Like with wearing so many masks, Karen and I have been washing our faces a lot more, and like we've been really bad about like taking care of our like washing our faces. That's not typically like a thing we do in our lives. Um, in fact, we've always kind of assumed that that's like a vain thing to do, but like washing your face is a pretty basic thing. Obviously, we wash our face in the shower, but like washing your face beyond that, it's not vain at all. It's like taking care of yourself. And we're kind of like, wow, our skin looks so nice. Like we're like, oh, we're actually taking care of ourselves and we enjoy, like, it's good to brush your teeth. It's good to like, take care of your body and treat it as a human should. It's like part of what it means. So I don't know if you have any comments about that. If you don't, we can
Well,
always go.
I do. I mean, I think that, you know, in my lifetime over the years, I have encountered so many righteous religious people who look like they've been weaned on pickles. They just sat down, and let's go back to what this empowering community that Jesus started. And I'm stealing that phrase from Daramuda Muraku's works. He called it an empowered, empowering community. That's the phrase that Muraku uses for the kingdom of God. What attracted people into that? After the death of Jesus, after the resurrection, after Jesus was gone, and this movement began to take off. Why were people attracted to it? Because the people in that movement loved one another. They were joyful, and there was something infectious about that caused people to say, I want that. I want to be in that. And I will tell you that the spiritual directors that I have engaged in my life over the last 60 years, I think it's important to have a spiritual director. And the ones that I have been attracted to are the people who are the happiest. They laugh the most. I remember the spiritual director that I currently have is a Roman Catholic nun who is she's a ninja warrior. And I went to see her a number of years ago, and I was feeling a little down about something. And she asked me, said, how old are you? And I said something like, well, I'm 76 or 77, and I don't know what it was. I'm 83 now. So whatever it was a number of years ago. And she looked at me and said, well, you're supposed to be dead. You've already lived longer than you're supposed to. And it just went, wow. It's not what I would think of as the best pastoral encounter, but boy, that was our first meeting. That was our very first meeting. I fell in love with that woman right on the spot. I thought, I want more of what you got. So she's just unafraid to step right into it.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of reminds me, this has been misattributed to some faithful Christian, but I think it was a later construction. I still think it's correct, but God's greatest joy is a human fully alive.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's my ambition isn't like to be happy, right? Like in my life, I just want to be alive. I just want to live life in what it means to be alive. Uh, so we talked about a lot of different things today, Bill. What are you going to take away from this? What are the big themes you think are important?
Well, I'm repeating. One is about the need for theological humility,
Yeah.
about we don't know, being willing to live in the mystery, and nevertheless to trust that in the mystery we are cared for and are charged with the responsibility of caring. We have a solemn obligation to live life and to live it to the full. And Koheleth doesn't mince words about that. He says, you do your work, and you have to have a balance between doing what you need to do to pay the rent, as it were, so to speak, to have a life, and you need to enjoy your life. You need to eat and drink and enjoy your friends and have a balance and live your life and prepare for be aware of the fact that you're going to die, and don't let that ruin your day.
Yeah. I'll add that like it's a fine art that we have to figure out when we're going to push against those people in power. And
Mm-hmm.
the time for a takeaway is not a time to mention a new thing, but like my commentator talked about how like the worst thing for Kohelet about people in power for you is the fact that you can actually change who is in power. Like you can't change God, you can't change death, but you can change the person in power of you. But like not really. Like there's very rare moments and very small moments where you can really do anything about it. So like being able to figure out when to accept that, hey, there's this person in power of you, and when to push and make it so that that's not the person in power of you, or maybe like there's a different way of organizing power. Uh, Again, the takeaway time is not a time to introduce new information, but I think is like I know of a deeply faithful Christian, a biblical scholar who writes about the fact that like he really believes that there shouldn't be any authority over anyone else. Like he's an anarchist, anarche, like against authority. He thinks the only authority should be God over us, because this idea that whenever humans are placed above one another, we oppress one another. So, but yeah, have wisdom about when to push against those people in power of you and when to not, and accept it
So
and just survive.
I want to correct an impression maybe some people get from listening to what I've said tonight, because I said I don't believe that God is out there stirring a stick and making things happen. But I do believe, one of my favorite verses in all the Bible is God saying, I have called you by name, you're mine. And no matter what happens, um, I believe that this relationship to God, the God of Jesus, as I refer to it, that relationship protects us from nothing. It didn't protect Jesus. And that relationship sustains us in everything. That we can't get out of the heart and hands of God, no matter what, no matter how it appears, that we are cared for all the time.
Bill, I'm realizing that we didn't answer Paul's question, and it's 7 o'clock. Paul kind of was back to the question of why we're not perfect. I think what you're getting at, Paul, is that there is, if there's going to be a variety of humanity, um, that doesn't allow for differences. That's an interesting idea. I don't know that I've heard that before. That wasn't exactly what I was going after, but just that for us to be human means we would be God. And so God couldn't have created other gods. God created humans, therefore that we're imperfect. That's kind of what Leibniz was going for. But that's interesting. I don't.
Yeah, perfection is a mathematical concept.
Yeah.
It's not a human concept, and I really regret that the King James and other versions of the Bible have translated that phrase "be perfect as God is perfect," because the real rendering is "be complete, be
Yeah.
whole."
Maturity is
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
grow up and
Yeah.
be an adult in your faith. And part of that means it's a very, very hopeful stance for me, because we still grow, we still learn. I'm still learning stuff all the time, and that's part of the excitement and enrichment of the journey. So perfection is not a helpful idea.
I agree. Well, we're out of time. Bill, I could keep talking to you. Um, you know, maybe we'll be back in another study. We're not in the. I don't think we're in the schedule again to be together, but maybe we'll be back in
No,
later studies. So I
maybe
enjoy.
maybe Karen is watching this saying, "I knew I shouldn't have put them together. I knew
Probably.
that was a mistake."
All right, everyone. Have a great night. We will see you next week.
Bye. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Bill.